The rope stretched against Ali's back like a violin string tuned to the exact frequency of doubt. For the first time in 8 years of professional boxing, Muhammad Ali was deliberately choosing to go where every trainer since childhood had told him never to go, against the ropes, trapped, with nowhere to run in George Foreman's sledgehammer fists, measuring the distance to his skull with the precision of a carpenter's tools. The stay do 20 my pulse with 60,000 voices screaming in French and Lingala and languages that had no names, their collective sound creating a wall of noise that pressed against the elevated ring like a physical force. The temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, even at 4 in the morning, transforming the boxing ring into a furnace where two men were about to discover which one could function longer in conditions that would have killed lesser athletes. Sweat beaded on Ali's forehead and ran down his temples in rivulets that caught the harsh stadium lighting, creating a geography of effort across features that had become the most recognizable face in global sports. Each drop traced a different path down his cheekbones, some falling to the canvas below, others absorbed by the leather of his gloves as he raised them in defensive position. It was the second round of the most important heavyweight fight in a decade, and Ali was doing something that defied every convention of boxing strategy, every principle of ring generalship, every survival instinct that kept him undefeated to the most dangerous division in professional sports. He was inviting George Foreman, the most devastating puncher of his generation, to hit him as hard and as often as possible. The decision had crystallized in his mind during a single exchange 30 seconds earlier, when Foreman's right hand had whistled past his ear with enough force to decapitate a smaller man. In that moment, Ali had felt something in the wind displacement, something in the rhythm of Foreman's breathing, something in the slight overcommitment of balance that suggested a different strategy than anyone had ever attempted against such devastating power. The ring canvas beneath their feet had already absorbed enough sweat to darken several patches near the center, creating a topography of effort that mapped the intensity of their early exchanges. Each footstep left temporary impressions in the softened surface, evidence of the tremendous forces being generated by two heavyweight champions operating at the absolute limits of human athletic performance. Foreman stalked forward with the mechanical precision of a man who had never learned to doubt his own power, his massive frame cutting through the humid African air like a battleship through calm waters. Each step carried the accumulated weight of 40 victories, 37 by knockout, a record destruction that had reduced grown men to unconscious children in less time than it took most people to tie their shoes. The champion's shoulders rolled with each forward step, his muscles rippling beneath skin that gleamed with perspiration under the television lights that had transformed the African night into artificial day. His breathing was controlled, methodical, the inhalation and exhalation of a man who had learned to treat violence as a technical profession requiring no more motion than carpentry or plumbing. Behind Foreman's cold exterior, his mind was processing information at superhuman speed. Distance, angles, timing, the subtle shifts in Ali's stance that might signal vulnerability. He had spent months studying Ali's defensive patterns, memorizing the rhythm of his movements, calculating the exact combinations that would penetrate the seemingly impenetrable defensive system that had frustrated every previous challenger. The champion's eyes showed no emotion as he closed the distance between himself and Ali's suddenly stationary form. This was what Foreman had been waiting for, the moment when Ali's dancing finally stopped, when the constant movement that had frustrated heavyweight contenders for years finally gave way to the kind of stationary target that Foreman's power was designed to obliterate. Ali's decision to lean against the ropes had been instantaneous, born not from fatigue or strategy, but from a flash of intuition that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. He had felt something in Foreman's rhythm during the first round, something the way the younger man threw his punches with the same devastating force regardless of whether they landed on flesh or air, something that suggested a different kind of vulnerability than most observers could detect. The rope against his back felt different now than it had during training sessions, more alive somehow, vibrating with the tension of the entire ring structure, transmitting the collective energy of 60,000 spectators through cables and canvas into his spine. It was no longer just a barrier. It was becoming part of an equation that his mind was solving in real time. The crowd noise shifted in pitch and intensity as they realized what they were witnessing. The greatest offensive fighter of his generation choosing to stand still and absorb punishment from the hardest hitter in heavyweight history. It was either genius or suicide, and nobody in the stadium, including the two men in the ring, knew which it would prove to be. Individual voices emerged from a wall of sound like instruments breaking free from an orchestra, a woman screaming, "Ollie! Ollie!" in accented English, a man shouting warnings in rapid French. Children's voices rising above the adult chaos with a pure emotion that only comes from witnessing something beyond their comprehension. The polyglot nature of the crowd created layers of reaction that built upon each other, creating a sonic landscape that was both beautiful and terrifying. Foreman's first punch against the ropes was a straight right hand that carried all the force his muscular frame could generate, a punch designed to end fights in the first exchange, to reduce complex boxing matches to simple demonstrations of physical power. The impact against Ali's gloves created a sound like a baseball bat hitting a leather cushion, sharp and violent, and somehow wrong in its suggestion of barely contained destruction. The force traveled through Ali's arms like electricity through copper wire, dispersing into his shoulder muscles, his back, his legs, finally dissipating into the ring structure itself. His body had become a complex shock absorption system, each muscle group working in coordination to manage energy that would have devastated a less prepared opponent. Ali's defensive technique was more sophisticated than anyone realized, incorporating principles of physics that most boxers never understood. His gloves didn't simply block punches. They redirected them, using angles and timing to deflect force rather than absorb it directly. His body positioning transformed each rope into a component of a larger mechanical system that distributed impact across multiple contact points. Ali's body absorbed the impact through a network of muscles that had been trained to function like springs, compressing under pressure and releasing energy in controlled bursts that dissipated force rather than concentrating it. But the crowd couldn't see the physics of impact absorption, couldn't understand the difference between taking punishment and managing punishment. All they could see was their hero allowing himself to be used as a human punching bag. The rope against Ali's back provided more than simple support. It became part of a complex mechanical system that redistributed the kinetic energy of Foreman's punches through Ali's body and into the ring structure itself. Each punch that landed was absorbed not just by flesh and bone, but by the entire elevated platform, spreading the impact across a surface area that reduced its concentration to manageable levels. Angelo Dundee watched from the corner, with growing understanding of what his fighter was attempting. The trainer's experienced eye could see details that escaped casual observers. The way Ali's feet remained planted but flexible, the micro-adjustments in his upper body that maximized the rope system's effectiveness, the calculated nature of what appeared to be desperate defense. Foreman threw another right hand, then a left hook, then combinations that would have flattened any other heavyweight in the division. His punches came with metronome regularity, each one thrown with maximum force, each one designed to end the fight immediately. But something was wrong. The devastating impact he expected wasn't materializing. Ali was still conscious, still moving, still talking. The champion's confidence began showing microscopic cracks as punch after devastating punch failed to produce the expected results. His breathing pattern changed subtly, becoming slightly more irregular as confusion began to penetrate the mechanical certainty that had carried him through 40 previous victories. Each unsuccessful combination was creating doubt where absolute certainty had existed just minutes earlier. "Is that all you got, George?" Ali's voice cut to the sound of leather on leather, through the crowd noise, through the ambient hum of 60,000 people breathing in unison. The words were perfectly timed to land during the brief pause between Foreman's combinations, designed to penetrate the younger man's consciousness at the exact moment when concentration was most critical. The psychological warfare began in earnest then, Ali's voice becoming another weapon in an arsenal that included speed, strategy, and an understanding of human psychology that went far beyond what most fighters ever developed. He had learned that heavyweight boxing was fought as much in the mind as in the body, that doubt was more devastating than any physical punch, that the right words delivered at the right moment could crack an opponent's confidence more effectively than a perfect combination. Foreman's punching rhythm began to change subtly, the mechanical precision of his early assault giving way to something more desperate, more urgent. He could feel his shots landing, could hear the impact, could see Ali's body absorbing punishment that should have ended the fight. But Ali wasn't falling, wasn't even wobbling, was, in fact, talking back with the casual confidence of a man who had everything under control. The African heat was beginning to affect both fighters differently. Foreman, accustomed to the controlled environment of American gymnasiums, was expending energy at an unsustainable rate as his body struggled to process the combination of extreme temperature, humidity, and the unexpected duration of violent exertion. Sweat poured from his frame in sheets, each drop representing precious electrolytes being lost to the unforgiving climate. "Come on, George, show me something." The words reached Foreman's ears between the sound of his own breathing and the distant roar of the crowd, penetrating his focus like water, seeping through cracks in concrete. Ali's tone suggested not just confidence but boredom, as if the hardest punches in heavyweight boxing were merely an inconvenience rather than a life-threatening assault. Television cameras positioned around the ring captured every angle of the unprecedented spectacle, their lenses preserving moments that would be analyzed frame by frame for decades. The operators instinctively understood they were documenting something revolutionary, something that would change not just the outcome of this fight, but the entire understanding of heavyweight boxing strategy. The rope-a-dope strategy was working on multiple levels that even Ali might not have fully understood when he first leaned back against the ropes. Physically, it was allowing him to absorb Foreman's power while expending minimal energy of his own. Psychologically, it was forcing Foreman to question everything he believed about his own abilities. Strategically, it was turning Foreman's greatest strength, his devastating punching power, into a liability that would exhaust him more quickly than any defense Ali could have mounted. Round 2 stretched towards conclusion with Foreman throwing punch after punch into Ali's defensive shell, each combination delivered with a kind of force that had made him the most feared heavyweight since Sonny Liston. But the devastating knockouts that had defined his career weren't happening. Instead, he was discovering that Ali possessed a defensive ability that transcended mere technique, that bordered on the supernatural. The crowd's energy was transforming from bloodthirsty anticipation to something more complex, a mixture of awe, confusion, and growing appreciation for what they were witnessing. The usual patterns of boxing spectatorship were being challenged by an event that didn't conform to their expectations of heavyweight violence. They were seeing something unprecedented, and their collective consciousness was struggling to process it. Ali's breathing remained controlled despite the punishment he was absorbing, his chest rising and falling with a measured rhythm of a man who understood exactly what was happening to his body and had calculated the acceptable limits of damage. Every punch Foreman threw was being cataloged, analyzed, and filed away for future reference in a boxing intelligence that operated faster than conscious thought. The crowd's reaction showed signs of shifting from concern to amazement as they began to realize that their hero wasn't just surviving Foreman's assault. He was controlling it. Each punch that landed without producing the expected result was evidence that something unprecedented was occurring in the ring, that the normal rules of heavyweight boxing were being rewritten in real time. "You punch like a girl, George." The words were delivered with perfect timing, dropping into the brief pause between Foreman's combinations like acid into an open wound. Ali's voice carried no strain despite the punishment he had been absorbing, suggesting reserves of strength and confidence that shouldn't have been possible under such circumstances. The insult struck Foreman with more psychological force than any punch he had received in his professional career. It challenged the fundamental assumption upon which his entire identity as a fighter was built, the belief that his power was unmatched, that his punches were devastating, that any opponent who absorbed them would be destroyed. The words created a crack in his mental armor that would widen with each passing second. Foreman's face began to show the first signs of frustration, subtle changes in expression that Ali read like a boxer's manual of psychological vulnerability. The mechanical confidence that had carried Foreman through 40 previous victories was beginning to crack under the pressure of an opponent who refused to behave according to established patterns of cause and effect. The younger fighter's punching pace increased as frustration transformed into desperation, his combinations becoming longer, more sustained, more committed to achieving immediate results. But each additional punch was costing him energy he couldn't afford to waste in the African heat, burning through reserves that would be crucial in the later rounds of what was beginning to look like a longer fight than he had planned. Beads of sweat flew from Foreman's body with each punch he threw, creating a fine mist in the superheated air around the two fighters. His muscle definition became more pronounced as dehydration began to set in, his body burning through fluids and electrolytes at a rate that would become dangerous as the fight progressed into later rounds. Ali continued his psychological assault between Foreman's physical combinations, his words chosen for maximum impact on a mind that was already beginning to question its fundamental assumptions about power, effectiveness, and the nature of heavyweight boxing itself. "I thought you were supposed to be dangerous," he said, the words cutting through Foreman's concentration like a knife through silk. The statement carried implications that went beyond simple trash talk, suggesting that Foreman's reputation had been built on fighting inferior opposition, that his devastating knockouts were the product of weak competition rather than genuine superiority. The psychological damage was immediate and profound, creating doubt where absolute certainty had existed just minutes earlier. The bell-ending round 2 found Foreman walking back to his corner with the expression of a man who had just discovered that his most reliable tool was somehow malfunctioning. He had thrown some of the hardest punches of his career, had landed combinations that would have hospitalized most heavyweight contenders, and had achieved nothing except a growing realization that he was facing something beyond his previous experience. His breathing was labored now, his chest heaving with the effort of processing oxygen in air that felt thick as soup. The energy expenditure of throwing maximum power punches for 3 minutes straight in 90-degree heat was beginning to create physiological changes that would compound with each passing round, setting the stage for the dramatic reversal that was still hours away. Ali pushed himself off the ropes with the casual ease of a man who had just completed a light training exercise rather than survive 2 rounds of assault from the hardest puncher in heavyweight boxing. His movement toward his corner carried no signs of damage, no indication that he had just absorbed punishment that should have left him unconscious or at least seriously impaired. The strategy that would become known as rope-a-dope had been born in those crucial seconds when Ali first leaned back against the ropes, when instinct and intelligence combined to create something that transcended traditional boxing technique. It was a moment when boxing strategy evolved from simple patterns of attack and defense to complex psychological warfare that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. In his corner, Ali's trainer Angelo Dundee understood immediately what his fighter had discovered. The rope-a-dope wasn't just a defensive strategy. It was a complete system for neutralizing power punchers that could revolutionize heavyweight boxing. But its effectiveness depended entirely on Ali's unique combination of defensive skill, psychological warfare, and the kind of courage that allowed a man to invite destruction in order to achieve victory. Foreman's corner was less certain about what they had witnessed. The punches had been landing, the impact had been real, but the expected results weren't materializing. Their fighter was expending an enormous amount of energy without achieving the knockouts that had defined his career, burning through conditioning in pursuit of a target that seemed to absorb unlimited punishment without significant effect. Dick Sadler, Foreman's trainer, whispered urgent adjustments into his fighter's ear, but his words carried an undertone of confusion that Foreman couldn't miss. Even his experienced trainer was struggling to explain why the most devastating puncher in heavyweight history was failing to achieve results against an opponent who was standing still and inviting punishment. The crowd's noise had evolved from simple excitement to something more complex, more aware of the historical significance of what they were witnessing. They were seeing the birth of a boxing strategy that would be studied and copied and debated for generations, the moment when one man's intuitive genius created something entirely new in a sport that thought it had seen everything. Round 3 began with Foreman moving forward once again, but his approach carried subtle differences that only trained observers could detect. The absolute confidence that had characterized his early assault was being replaced by something more cautious, more questioning, more aware that he was facing an opponent who didn't follow the established rules of heavyweight boxing. Ali returned to the ropes immediately, settling back against him with the confidence of a man who had discovered something that his opponent didn't understand. The strategy that had been born from instinct was becoming conscious choice, evolving from desperate improvisation to calculated technique that would define not just this fight, but Ali's entire approach to the sport. The rope-a-dope had been born in those crucial 8 seconds when Ali first leaned back and invited Foreman to hit him. But its implications would extend far beyond the single fight, creating a new chapter in boxing strategy that proved intelligence could triumph over power, that psychological warfare was as important as physical conditioning, that the greatest victories sometimes require the courage to appear defeated while secretly controlling everything that mattered. As the 3rd round progressed, the full genius of Ali's improvised strategy became apparent to those with eyes to see it. He had turned Foreman's greatest strength into his greatest weakness, had transformed apparent vulnerability into actual dominance, had proven that in the highest levels of human combat, the mind was more powerful than the fist. The rope-a-dope was more than a defensive technique. It was a philosophy that would change boxing forever,